My duty was written in ancient pacts, promises that promised peace, yet chained me. I was destined for the alpha of stability and honor, the one reason respects but the heart never burns for. But he watched me in silence, letting a primal desire simmer beneath his dominant presence. He did not respect the fate they tried to impose on me. And then, in the moment another leader prepared to claim me, his obsession erupted like fire. The sacred ceremony became a battlefield, and he did not ask for permission. He claimed my body, my soul, my everything. In a brutal, breathtaking display, he tore me from the planned alliance, igniting a war only we could understand. Now, I am trapped in this possessive bond, suspended between fear and desire, lost in the terrifying power he wields over me. And secretly, that power consumes me. The stone of the obsidian bluff was still slick with the morning dew, but the air around me was thick with the scent of ozone and spilled blood. Not my blood, thankfully, but the remnants of the skirmish that had torn my perfectly planned future into sharp, ugly shards. I was meant to be standing beside Harrison Bennett, 26, the man whose steady gaze and honorable reputation had been carefully chosen to secure the peace. We were supposed to be exchanging the oaths, the finality sealed by the placing of the thorn sigil ring. Instead, I found myself airborne, crushed against the granite-hard chest of the alpha who saw political necessity as a challenge to his very existence. Sterling Cade Vaughn, 28, was a force of nature, imposing height, broad shoulders straining the thick leather he wore, dark, intense features that promised violence and command. His scent, pine and cold mountain air mixed with pure, distilled rage, was overwhelming. I was Cassidy Hayes, 23, designated Luna, raised on the philosophy of duty and diplomatic resilience. But right now, I was nothing more than property violently claimed. The flight back to his territory was a blur of speed and terror. He shifted not long after we left the precipice, running on 4 legs, but his jaws clamped carefully yet fiercely around the back of my tunic. I could only see the retreating view of the fractured peace we had labored years to build. I remember seeing Harrison, usually so clean-cut and athletic, roaring a sound of betrayal and fury, the declaration of territorial war echoing behind us before the trees swallowed the sound. When we finally slowed, the air was frigid and thin. We were deep in his domain. The Blackwood Citadel rose from the mountain like a scar carved into the earth, ancient stone architecture, cold and imposing, surrounded by an impenetrable fortress of dense, rugged forest. It wasn't the welcoming, sun-drenched Havenbrook estate I had been raised in. This was a fortress built for war, fueled by raw, unadulterated power. Cade shifted back, his skin steaming in the cool air. His eyes, the color of burnt umber, locked onto mine. There was no apology, no hesitation, only absolute, primal satisfaction that made my stomach clench with an awful mixture of fear and something far more dangerous. "You look ill," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through my bones. "You kidnapped me, Sterling. You declared war. My life is forfeit and my family is undoubtedly preparing their counter-assault." I bit back, trying to summon the composure expected of a future Luna, even one who had just been forcefully stolen. Ill is an understatement. He didn't flinch. Instead, he gripped my wrist, his thumb tracing the blue line of my pulse. "Your life is not forfeit. It has merely been redirected. Your destiny was always here, with me." He pulled me into the towering gatehouse. Everything inside the citadel felt heavy. The air, the silence, the weight of the stone. His gamma, a stocky man with calculating eyes, met us in the antechamber, holding a ceremonial object that made my blood run cold. It was the ironwood collar, heavy, intricately carved wood reinforced with polished steel, designed to sit just beneath the jawline. It wasn't merely restrictive, it was symbolic, a physical manifestation of his immediate dominance and possession. It was a brand. Alpha, the gamma nodded, presenting the object. I stiffened, pulling my arm away from Cade. "Absolutely not. I am not a dog or a prisoner of war. I am Cassidy Hayes. I will not wear that. Cade's movements were deceptively slow, yet utterly final. He stepped closer, closing the distance until the heat emanating from his body engulfed me. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His dominance filled the space, crushing the air from my lungs. "You are precisely what I choose you to be, Cassidy," he murmured, his gaze dropping to my neck. "You are mine." The collar simply informs the world of the reality I have established. It is non-removable, a mark of my claim, and a shield against those who would try to undo what I have done. His large, calloused hands were surprisingly gentle as he clasped the collar around my neck, securing the mechanism with a barely audible click. The sensation was immediate and suffocating, not physically painful, but an intense psychological blow. The weight, the cold metal against my skin, was a constant damning reminder. I lifted a hand to the collar, my fingers trembling. "You have destroyed everything. I have saved everything," he corrected, his voice hardening. "You were going to commit treason against fate, against the bond. You were going to let that weak fool Bennett mark you with the promise of stability, when your presence demands chaos and truth." He didn't wait for a response, hauling me up the spiraling stone staircase toward the highest point of the fortress, the Blackwood Citadel apex. The apex was a small, brutally simple chamber, lined with dark, rough-hewn stone and centered around a roaring stone hearth. The only window offered a breathtaking, terrifying view of the vast, rugged territories that were now officially at war because of us. He threw me onto a furs-covered bench. I scrambled to stand, clutching the collar. "Look at me, Cassidy." I refused, staring instead into the flames, trying to burn away the image of his betrayal. I said, "Look at me." The command was laced with alpha authority, vibrating with enough sheer power to physically compel a lesser wolf. I fought it, every fiber of my being dedicated to proving that he could possess my body, but never my spirit. I turned slowly, my amber eyes blazing with suppressed independence. "I despise you, Sterling. You speak of fate and truth, but you act with the lowest form of selfishness. You couldn't bear the thought of another alpha claiming me, so you used brute force. You ruined the lives of thousands for your own monstrous ego." He stepped closer, his shadow falling over me. This was the moment, the confrontation I knew had to come. This was the climax of the physical struggle, the raw collision of his dominance and my defiance. "Monstrous ego?" He laughed, a short, dark sound devoid of humor. He caged me against the bench, resting his powerful hands on either side of my head. The raw animal musk of him flooded my senses, triggering a deep, unwanted tremor that had nothing to do with fear. "I watched you, Cassidy, for years. I watched you playing the dutiful daughter, accepting the trajectory they laid out for you. I saw the intelligence behind those striking eyes, the resilience in your posture, and the suppressed fire they tried to smother with diplomacy," he growled, leaning in until his breath ghosted over my ear. "And every time you nodded respectfully to Harrison Bennett, I felt a physical ripping in my chest. He wasn't just talking about politics. He was talking about the mate bond, the primal, fundamental connection that had simmered beneath the surface of fragile peace. The thought of Bennett's scent marking you, of his touch on your skin, of him putting that damned gilded ring on your finger. It wasn't ego. It was an instinct so pure, so demanding, it threatened to strip the skin from my bones," Cade confessed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I could not, would not, allow another man to claim the one thing in this world that belongs utterly and irrevocably to me." My breath hitched. The proximity was destroying my carefully constructed walls. He was brutal, but he was right. Even in the moments I stood next to Harrison, preparing to pledge myself, there had been a hollow ache, a sense of playing a role. "And you think stealing me will make me yours?" I whispered, fighting the sudden agonizing heat pooling in my center. He pulled back just enough to look me in the eye, his dark features intense and unwavering. He reached out, his finger tracing the line of the ironwood collar, making me shiver violently. "I know it will," he stated, his confidence chilling. "The claiming is done. The bond is sealed, not by a ceremony, but by the sheer, unavoidable force of our combined power. You can hate the method, Cassidy, but you cannot deny the consequence." And then, he did the unthinkable. He didn't kiss me violently. He kissed me with a devastating tenderness that cracked my resolve. His lips were firm, possessive, yet they moved with a desperate urgency that mirrored the chaos in his heart. It was a claim, an assertion, but underneath the dominance, there was a frightening, searing connection that ignited the mate bond with terrifying swiftness. The world outside the citadel, the brewing war, the shattered alliances, the honorable man I was meant to marry, faded into a distant echo. There was only the heat of the fire, the cold metal of the collar, and the devastating reality of the man holding me. The primal forces warred with my intellect. I was furious, outraged, violated, yet my body was responding to his presence with a fierce magnetic pull. When he finally drew back, his eyes were smoky with possessiveness and a shadow of vulnerability I hadn't expected. "I took you because I had to," he stated, his forehead resting against mine. "I couldn't bear seeing another alpha claim you. I broke the world to make you mine. Now the war is outside our walls, and the real battle is here, inside this room." He paused, a slight tremor in his hand as he cupped my cheek. "You hate me, and you have every right to. But I will show you that what we share transcends duty and politics. I will not seek your forgiveness today, Cassidy, but I will work to earn your heart over every day that follows. You are bound to me now, and I will not let that bond be merely one of force." The intense realization settled over me, heavy as the ironwood collar. He had stolen me, yes, and he had shattered my life, but in doing so, he had awakened a wild, fierce part of myself I hadn't known existed. I was captive, stripped of my choices, forced into a future dictated by instinct and dominance. Yet, looking into those intense, dark eyes, I knew the terrifying truth. The raw, undeniable connection was real, and it was inseparable from the brute force he had used to seize me. The stability I was promised with Harrison was gone, replaced by the dangerous, volatile landscape of Sterling Vaughn. I was locked in, body and soul, to a dominant man whose desire bordered on obsession. I didn't love him. I might never forgive him. But as I felt the deep, resonant thrum of our forced bond settle into my very core, I knew I was irrevocably his. "This is not a courtship, Sterling," I whispered, the words laced with pain and a frightening dawning acceptance. "It is a foundation," he corrected, his thumb brushing away a tear I hadn't realized I shed. "And now that I have claimed you, I will make this foundation strong enough to withstand the war I started." The Blackwood Citadel was my prison, but as the fire crackled, casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls, I realized it was also the beginning of my true, terrifying destiny. I was stolen. I was marked. And now, I had to learn how to live, and perhaps how to love, the man who valued possession over peace. The door to the apex closed, sealing us inside the turbulent, inescapable reality of our forced mate bond. The stability of Havenbrook was a ghost. The only reality now was the demanding presence of my captor. The heat of Sterling's kiss burned away the diplomatic frost I had cultivated for years, leaving behind a raw, visceral panic. When he pulled away, the air felt thin, charged with the scent of pine and the electric ozone of a broken barrier. My lips still tingled, a searing betrayal from my own body. That devastating tenderness, layered over absolute command, was the most dangerous weapon he possessed. He moved away from me, the action casual, but the power radiating off him anything but. He walked to the hearth, tossing another massive log onto the already roaring fire. The silence that followed the immediate intensity was thick, oppressive. The ironwood collar felt colder, heavier, a solid chain around my future. I reached up and gripped it, the rough steel unforgiving against my skin. "Take it off," I commanded, though the word felt thin and useless, swallowed by the stone walls of the apex. He turned slowly, his dark features unreadable, settling onto a nearby chair built from dark, scarred wood. "You know I won't. That collar is the boundary, Cassidy. It is the peace treaty I offer the world. She is mine. Do not touch. It's a declaration of war, not a treaty," I argued, pulling my feet up onto the furs, instinctively trying to shrink away from his omnipresent authority. "You stole the designated Luna. Harrison will not stop until he has reclaimed me, or destroyed you. Then he is a fool," Sterling dismissed, crossing one massive leg over the other. "Harrison wanted an alliance. I wanted you. There is a fundamental difference in motive, which makes my resolve absolute, and his merely political. I scoffed. A bitter sound. And my consent. Where does that factor into your absolute resolve? His eyes narrowed slightly, a flash of something primitive and predatory crossing them. Consent is a luxury afforded to choices that do not threaten fundamental destiny. You were blind to what we are. I merely provided the necessary clarity, forcefully perhaps, but clarity nonetheless. The confinement was immediate. This room, the apex, was to be our shared space, his command center, and my gilded cage. I realized the true horror wasn't the collar or the war. It was the inevitable constant proximity to the source of my turmoil. The door remained sealed, heavy iron bolted into the ancient stone. I was completely isolated, cut off from my family, my pack, and the life of polite, careful duty that had defined me. Every breath was now regulated by the man who claimed me through instinct, not diplomacy. As the fire settled into embers and a faint, cold moonlight streamed through the narrow window, I found myself pacing. The sheer magnitude of my situation pressed down on me. I was wearing the insignia of my captivity, married to a fate I hated, yet irresistibly drawn to the brute who imposed it. The ironwood collar chafed, not physically, but psychologically, rubbing against the suppressed independence I now desperately needed to summon. Sterling didn't sleep in the conventional sense. He sat upright, watching me, his presence a heavy, comforting, yet terrifying weight in the darkness. He was dressed simply now, his massive shoulders bare, exposing the complex, ancient scars that mapped his history of dominance and survival. The sight was unnervingly intimate. I stopped pacing abruptly, facing him. You spoke of earning my heart. How can you expect me to love a man who sees me as a territory to be conquered, who strips me of every shred of dignity and choice? Because I understand you better than you understand yourself, he countered, his voice low and intimate in the dark. He rose slowly, moving toward me with the focused intensity of a predator who has cornered his prey. He stopped inches away. I could feel the heat radiating from his chest, the raw scent of him, protection and danger inextricably mixed. His large hand reached out, not to touch my face, but to gently guide my fingers away from the ironwood collar, where I was unconsciously clawing at the metal. Look at this collar, Cassidy, he instructed, his thumb pressing lightly against the cold steel beneath my chin. It is a symbol of ownership, yes, but it is also a reminder that I claimed you publicly, fiercely, against the world. I risked everything, my territory, my pack, my life, because I could not live knowing you belonged to another. This was the moment of friction, the climax of our internal war. He was laying bare the terrifying, obsessive nature of his desire. It wasn't about politics or power games. It was fundamentally about us. The air was so thick with unspoken truth and primal urges that I could barely breathe. That is obsession, Sterling, I choked out, tears of frustration finally welling. Perhaps, he conceded, leaning down until his lips brushed my earlobe, sending a jolt down my spine that betrayed my fury. But obsession is the strongest form of devotion. Harrison offered you stability and respectability. I offer you truth. I am your truth, Cassidy, whether you acknowledge it or not. He shifted his grip, his hand sliding slightly lower, his fingers tangling in my hair, tilting my head back slightly so I was forced to gaze up at him. The command in his eyes was absolute, but beneath it, I saw a flicker of the very vulnerability he had mentioned, the fear that even though he had seized me, he might still lose me. He leaned in, his mouth seeking mine again, but this time the kiss was different. It was demanding, possessive, a deep exploration of the territory he had violently claimed. He didn't ask for permission. He took it, and in that theft, the last vestige of my denial crumbled. And this time, against my will, against every righteous principle I held dear, I kissed him back. The action was a surrender, not of love, but of recognition. The mate bond, dormant and ignored for years, burst into full, terrifying life, a roaring inferno that consumed the last remnants of my political facade. The heat intensified, spreading from my chest to every limb, binding me to him with an invisible, unbreakable thread woven from instinct and fate. He had ripped the bond to the surface, and now it demanded attention. When he finally broke contact, both of us were breathing heavily, the air in the apex thick and electric. I stood there, utterly undone. My defiance hadn't mattered. My political duty was dead. The brute force had succeeded where diplomacy would have failed. I hate that this is real, I whispered, resting my forehead against his shoulder, seeking the solidity of his imposing frame, simply to keep from collapsing. Sterling wrapped his arms around me, holding me tight against his heart. The raw, heavy thrum of his heartbeat, the deep, foundational rhythm of his alpha nature, resonated with my own. "Hate the beginning, Cassidy," he murmured, his voice softening, becoming less of a command and more of a deeply felt promise. "But do not hate the inevitability. I gave up peace for you. I chose war, destruction, and the eternal condemnation of every surrounding territory, simply so that my hands could be the only ones to touch you, and my scent the only one to mark you." He pulled back, his scarred face intense. He reached for a heavy dark cloak draped over the back of the chair and draped it around my shoulders. The practical care was jarringly at odds with the violence of his actions. "The world is at war. We cannot leave this citadel," he stated, his grip firm as he led me toward the raised platform where his massive bed of furs lay. "You are safe here, but you are also bound. You will learn the difference between being owned and being cherished, even when the claiming started with a theft." He was giving me the cold, hard terms of my new existence. Complete captivity, yet complete safety. I was his prize, and he would defend his possession until the last breath. The promise in his eyes was terrifyingly absolute. I looked out the narrow window one last time. Below, the dense, rugged forest was silent, hiding the preparations for the inevitable conflict. The rolling hills and manicured lawns of my home, the place of duty and polite respect, were irrevocably lost. I was the stolen Luna, the prize in a territorial war, wearing the ironwood collar of my possessor. I was furious, yes, but the fire of the mate bond, ignited by Sterling's devastating possessiveness, was already starting to consume the edges of my anger. He had taken me because he couldn't bear the alternative. Now, the rest of my life would be spent trying to determine if the love that bloomed from such brutal roots could ever be enough to forgive the destruction he wrought. I lay down on the furs, the weight of the collar settling heavily against the pillow. Sterling lay beside me, not touching me, but close enough that the air between us crackled with residual tension. His dark eyes watched mine until mine finally closed in sheer exhaustion. He hadn't asked for my forgiveness yet, only my presence. And my presence, I knew with a terrifying certainty, he had secured absolutely. The war raged outside, but inside the apex, a fiercer, more intimate battle for my heart had just begun. A battle waged by the man who had stolen me, ensuring that even if I never loved him, I would never, ever leave. This was my destiny, forged in fire and force, locked within the stone walls of the Blackwood Citadel. The silence that descended upon the Blackwood Citadel apex was deceptive. It was the heavy quiet of a fortress holding its breath, the stillness before a storm breaks. Lying rigidly on the soft animal furs beside Sterling, I felt the phantom pain of the kiss, not physical injury, but the spiritual wound of my own unexpected response. The mate bond was not a gentle awakening. It was a violent hijacking of my consciousness, orchestrated by a man who valued primal ownership over political stability. I shifted slightly, the fine linen shift rustling beneath the cloak he had provided. The ironwood collar was a constant cold pressure. I reached up, tracing the smooth, unforgiving curve of the metal. It wasn't just a collar. It was the symbol of everything I had lost, and everything he had gambled. "Tell me again," I started, my voice raw and unsteady, turning my head slightly to look at his formidable profile in the dim light. His eyes were open, focused on the cavernous ceiling, but I knew his attention was entirely on me. "Tell me what I am supposed to feel when I look at you. Fear? Hatred? Gratitude for being saved from a duty I was trained my entire life to fulfill?" Sterling didn't move. He maintained that imposing stillness that somehow radiated more power than any aggressive display. "You feel what is real, Cassidy. That is the only truth that matters now. The rest is noise." "The noise is war, Sterling," I countered, sitting up abruptly, the furs pooling around my waist. The cold stone floor met my feet, grounding me. "The noise is Harrison mobilizing his entire pack, convinced that I was kidnapped. Which, for the record, I was. Harrison is mobilizing his forces because his political leverage was destroyed," Sterling corrected, his tone flat, devoid of emotion. He wanted the Thorn sigil ring to secure his territory and maintain his diplomatic standing. "He didn't want you. Not in the way that matters. He wanted the Luna placeholder. The mention of the ring, the ceremonial artifact meant to seal the perfectly respectable, utterly passionless union, brought a fresh wave of bitterness. I had carefully packed it, ready to receive it at the obsidian bluff as a promise of peace. Now, it was likely being used as proof of Sterling's audacity. And you? I challenged, rising to my full height, crossing my arms defensively over my chest. You wanted the prize, a direct challenge to the authority that threatened your dominance. You didn't claim me out of love, or even respect. You claimed me because the alternative was an intolerable offense to your ego. He finally moved, rolling onto his side, propping his head up with one muscular arm. His eyes, dark and deep, bore into mine. They didn't deny my accusation. They absorbed it, processed it, and dismissed it as irrelevant. I told you, Cassidy. I couldn't bear the sight of another alpha claiming what was intrinsically mine. He paused, his gaze dropping briefly to the ironwood collar, then returning to my face. It's true. The political reality was secondary. The primal truth was absolute. When I saw you standing there, dressed in white, ready to pledge your fealty to Harrison, something broke in me. It was a failure of my own nature that I allowed it to get that far. I shook my head, frustration making my vision swim. You see me as property, a necessary conquest. I see you as my future, he corrected gently, the shift in his voice startling. It was the sound of bedrock moving. Harrison would have seen you as his partner. I see you as the other half of my core. We are the same species, but our wiring is fundamentally different. When an alpha like me finds his mate, there is no negotiation, only possession. I have had years to suppress this truth, but watching you nearly taken, that was the trigger for annihilation. Mine, or his. He rose, the sheer size and intensity of him filling the space instantly. He wore only the rough, dark trousers he had changed into. The intricate map of scars across his torso seemed to pulse in the faint moonlight, each mark a testament to the life of violence and command he had led. He was a creature forged in conflict, and I was now inextricably bound to his dangerous reality. He walked past me to the narrow window, gazing out over the dense, rugged blackwood forest, a wall of black shadow against the deep indigo sky. The forest is restless, he murmured, his voice a low rumble. Harrison will try a direct breach within 72 hours. He is predictable. He believes he is doing the honorable thing, rescuing the designated Luna. His pack will be motivated by outrage and misplaced loyalty. And you? I asked, following him, standing slightly behind his enormous frame. What motivates your pack? Fear of their ruthless leader? Sterling turned, his mouth curving into a slight, utterly humorless smile. My pack understands primal law. They understand that the alpha takes what he needs to ensure the strength of the lineage. They understand that when I claimed you, I gave them the most formidable Luna they could hope for. They follow me because they know I will always win, and my victory ensures their survival. This was the terrifying reality. To his people, I was not a victim, but a symbol of their renewed dominance. You spoke of earning my heart. I pressed, needing to find the one weak point in his granite exterior. How can you possibly earn affection when every moment of my existence is defined by this steel? I tapped the collar sharply. It is a constant physical reminder that I have no autonomy, no voice, no choice. He didn't answer with words this time. Instead, he reached out, his hand enveloping my neck, his thumb resting gently just beneath the cold metal of the collar. It was a gesture that was both possessive and protective, a paradox that defined him. You believe that freedom is measured by the lack of restraint, Cassidy, he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. I believe freedom is knowing where you belong. You belong here, with me. Then, the true intensity began. He pressed his thumb down firmly, not painfully, but with calculated purpose. As he applied pressure, I felt a familiar, sickening surge, the activation of the mate bond. But this time, he was manipulating it, focusing it. A profound, inescapable heat rushed through my veins. It was the same overwhelming warmth I had felt after the kiss, but now it was magnified tenfold. The world narrowed down to the sound of his breathing, and the frantic, heavy beat of my own heart, which seemed to be trying to synchronize with his. My knees felt weak. I stumbled, and Sterling caught me instantly, his arms wrapping around me, pulling my body flush against his hard, warm chest. The bond wasn't just physical sensation. It was an emotional inundation. Suddenly, I wasn't just feeling my own confusion and rage. I was submerged in his emotion. It was a tidal wave of fierce, blinding relief, absolute certainty, and a terrifying, bone-deep need. He needed me in a way that went beyond desire. It was fundamental, like air or gravity. This was the climax, the brutal, nonverbal assertion of the bond. He was showing me, with crushing clarity, that this connection was not a choice I could revoke, nor was it a feeling I could rationalize away. It was a biological imperative, overriding every rational, dutiful instinct I possessed. "You are mine," the feeling screamed into my mind, a thought not voiced, but transmitted directly through the searing heat of the connection. "This is not negotiable. This is destiny," I gasped, clinging to his shoulders, trying desperately to find purchase in the overwhelming sensation. Tears of pure frustration streamed down my face. I was furious that my body betrayed me so thoroughly, furious that his ruthless domination felt, paradoxically, like the safest place I had ever been. He held me until the surge subsided, until my frantic heartbeat began to slow, pulling me back from the brink of total sensory overload. When he finally loosened his grip, he stepped back, but his hands remained on my waist, keeping the minimal distance between us. "That is what I offer, Cassidy," he said, his voice husky from the exertion of focusing the bond. A connection so absolute, so complete, that the petty concerns of alliances and political duty become dust. I took you because I couldn't bear the thought of existing without the other half of my soul. That is not ego. That is necessity. He reached up, gently wiping the tears from my cheeks, with a thumb that felt surprisingly calloused and tender at the same time. "I do not expect your forgiveness today. I do not expect your love tomorrow. But I demand your presence, and I demand your recognition of the truth we share." I stood there, defeated by biology, not by force. The war outside was external, but the war within, the struggle against the mate bond, was the one I was losing decisively. "What if I never accept this?" I whispered, the exhaustion now profound, settling into my bones. "Then I will cherish the woman who hates me," Sterling replied, his expression solemn. "I will wait, because time does not matter to a bond this strong. The war will eventually end. The territory will stabilize. And when all the fighting is done, when the noise fades, you will still be here. You will still be wearing my mark, and you will still be sleeping next to the alpha who chose you above all else." He led me back toward the firs. This time, I didn't resist. I lay down, feeling the ancient, imposing walls of the Blackwood Citadel apex settle around me. It was cold, dark, and utterly secure. Sterling lay down beside me again, turning his back this time, giving me space, but his massive presence was still an anchor. The scent of pine and rich earth, his scent, the scent of home now, terrifyingly, filled my senses. I reached up one last time, my fingers brushing the unforgiving metal of the ironwood collar. It was non-removable, a constant vow. He hadn't just claimed me on the obsidian bluff. He had permanently fused our fates. The political world had demanded I be a diplomat. Sterling had demanded I be a mate. The distinction was sharp and brutal. I closed my eyes, accepting the cold, hard terms of my new existence. Captive, bonded, and inescapably his. Outside, the territorial war was just beginning, but inside the apex, the battle for Cassidy's heart had reached a volatile stalemate. He had won the war of possession. Now, he faced the lifelong campaign for devotion. And as I drifted toward sleep, nestled against the unwavering warmth of the man who risked everything to steal me, I knew one thing. He might have shattered my life, but he had also irrevocably defined it. The destiny he had seized was now our joint burden to bear, forever locked within the heart of the Blackwood Citadel. Love the vibe? Drop a like, hit subscribe,